This is a Fox News special report.
I'm Britt Hume, Fox News, Washington. In less than 2 minutes, Vice President Gore will address the nation from his office just across from the White House to acknowledge that the presidential race is over and he has lost. For a sense of what the Vice President will say and how, we're joined now from the White House by Fox News White House correspondent Wendell Goler. Good evening, Wendell.
Good evening, Britt. The Vice President will call on the nation to get behind George W. Bush and on Bush to work with Democrats in a spirit of bipartisanship as he gives up the ultimate goal of a life devoted to politics. The roughly 10-minute speech, we're told, was written by Gore himself. It will be delivered from his office in the Eisenhower office building, the room with the wreath on it over my shoulder. Standing beside him will be running mate Joe Lieberman. Just a few minutes ago, Gore called Texas Governor George W. Bush to congratulate him. The second time he's made such a call, but unlike election night, there'll be no taking back this one. Britt?
Now, I take it, Wendell, that while Joe Lieberman will be there with him, and had earlier there'd been some thought that he might have something to say, I take it, Wendell, he will not.
There was a thought that Lieberman would introduce the Vice President. He will not do that. Mr. Gore will be the only one to speak tonight. Britt?
All right, Wendell, thank you very much. So we expect the Vice President from this office there in the old Executive Office building just across from the White House to speak in just a couple of moments. There you see a live shot of the chamber in which he will speak. And any second now he should be coming into the room to make his remarks. And here he is now.
Good evening. Just moments ago, I spoke with George W. Bush and congratulated him on becoming the 43rd President of the United States. And I promised him that I wouldn't call him back this time. I offered to meet with him as soon as possible so that we can start to heal the divisions of the campaign and the contest through which we've just passed. Almost a century and a half ago, Senator Stephen Douglas told Abraham Lincoln, who had just defeated him for the presidency, "Partisan feeling must yield to patriotism." I'm with you, Mr. President, and God bless you. Well, in that same spirit, I say to President-elect Bush that what remains of partisan rancor must now be put aside, and may God bless his stewardship of this country. Neither he nor I anticipated this long and difficult road. Certainly neither of us wanted it to happen. Yet it came, and now it has ended, resolved as it must be resolved through the honored institutions of our democracy. Over the library of one of our great law schools is inscribed the motto, "Not under man, but under God and law." That's the ruling principle of American freedom, the source of our democratic liberties. I've tried to make it my guide throughout this contest, as it has guided America's deliberations of all the complex issues of the past 5 weeks. Now the U.S. Supreme Court has spoken. Let there be no doubt. While I strongly disagree with the court's decision, I accept it. I accept the finality of this outcome, which will be ratified next Monday in the Electoral College. And tonight, for the sake of our unity as a people and the strength of our democracy, I offer my concession. I also accept my responsibility, which I will discharge unconditionally, to honor the new president-elect and do everything possible to help him bring Americans together in fulfillment of the great vision that our Declaration of Independence defines and that our Constitution affirms and defends. Let me say how grateful I am to all those who supported me and supported the cause for which we have fought. Tipper and I feel a deep gratitude to Joe and Hadassah Lieberman, who brought passion and high purpose to our partnership and opened new doors, not just for our campaign, but for our country. This has been an extraordinary election, but in one of God's unforeseen paths, this belatedly broken impasse can point us all to a new common ground, for its very closeness can serve to remind us that we are one people with a shared history and a shared destiny. Indeed, that history gives us many examples of contests as hotly debated, as fiercely fought, with their own challenges to the popular will. Other disputes have dragged on for weeks before reaching resolution. And each time, both the victor and the vanquished have accepted the result peacefully and in a spirit of reconciliation. So let it be with us. I know that many of my supporters are disappointed. I am too. But our disappointment must be overcome by our love of country. And I say to our fellow members of the world community, let no one see this contest as a sign of American weakness. The strength of American democracy is shown most clearly through the difficulties it can overcome. Some have expressed concern that the unusual nature of this election might hamper the next president in the conduct of his office. I do not believe it need be so. President-elect Bush inherits a nation whose citizens will be ready to assist him in the conduct of his large responsibilities. I personally will be at his disposal, and I call on all Americans. I particularly urge all who stood with us to unite behind our next president. This is America. Just as we fight hard when the stakes are high, we close ranks and come together when the contest is done. And while there will be time enough to debate our continuing differences, now is the time to recognize that that which unites us is greater than that which divides us. While we yet hold and do not yield our opposing beliefs, there is a higher duty than the one we owe to political party. This is America, and we put country before party. We will stand together behind our new president. As for what I'll do next, I don't know the answer to that one yet. Like many of you, I'm looking forward to spending the holidays with family and old friends. I know I'll spend time in Tennessee and mend some fences, literally and figuratively. Some have asked whether I have any regrets, and I do have one regret, that I didn't get the chance to stay and fight for the American people over the next 4 years, especially for those who need burdens lifted and barriers removed, especially for those who feel their voices have not been heard. I heard you, and I will not forget. I've seen America in this campaign, and I like what I see. It's worth fighting for, and that's a fight I'll never stop. As for the battle that ends tonight, I do believe, as my father once said, that no matter how hard the loss, defeat may serve as well as victory to shake the soul and let the glory out. So for me, this campaign ends as it began, with the love of Tipper and our family, with faith in God and in the country I have been so proud to serve, from Vietnam to the vice presidency, and with gratitude to our truly tireless campaign staff and volunteers, including all those who worked so hard in Florida for the last 36 days. Now the political struggle is over, and we turn again to the unending struggle for the common good of all Americans and for those multitudes around the world who look to us for leadership in the cause of freedom. In the words of our great hymn, America, America, let us crown thy good with brotherhood from sea to shining sea. And now, my friends, in a phrase I once addressed to others, it's time for me to go. Thank you, and good night, and God bless America.
And so Vice President Gore, in brief remarks from his office in the Executive Office building, has made a concession speech in which he used the word concession. He also used the word congratulation. And he did not say, I think it is fair to say, a bitter word. He said, may God bless the steward, referring to George W. Bush's stewardship of this country. He became the first person, I think, officially to call George W. Bush president-elect. I personally, he said, will be at his disposal. And he added, I call on all Americans. I particularly urge all who stood with us to unite behind our next president. And he said that that which unites us is greater than that which divides us. So I think remarks perhaps that would certainly be met with gratitude by George W. Bush, certainly gracious, not a bitter word, as I said. That concludes our report from here in Washington. I'm Britt Hume. Please stay tuned to Fox News Channel and this Fox station for continuing coverage of this story.
This has been a Fox News Special Report.
And we're back with continuing coverage and analysis here on the Fox News Channel. We learned from Austin that Governor Bush, having received the congratulatory phone call that Vice President Gore indicated that he made just before making his concession speech, he described his conversation with Al Gore as brief, gracious, and congratulatory. And the governor is quoted as saying, thank you. I look forward to seeing you next Tuesday. I am honored that you would receive me. I'm looking forward to working with you to heal the nation. Thank you very much. He said goodbye. So Carl Cameron joins us now from Austin for some sense of when he said, I'm honored you're going to receive me next Tuesday. We know that Governor Bush was planning to come to Washington. I take it there will be a meeting.
Yes, in fact, the governor now plans to leave Austin Sunday and spend the evening overnight in Washington Sunday night, spend the day on Monday meeting with congressional leaders of both parties, visits on Capitol Hill with congressional leadership as well as certain select committee chairpersons. He will then spend another night in Washington Monday evening, and on Tuesday, in addition to some meetings with additional Republican and Democratic leaders, will meet with Vice President Gore. This is something that had been in the works with staff for the last several hours, and it was obviously confirmed in this quote we've received that the governor offered when he had his conversation with Vice President Gore. The whole conversation apparently lasted less than 35 seconds and was, in fact, while the vice president was in his automobile en route to making that speech that we just heard. The governor will be returning to Austin Tuesday evening, whereupon we're led to believe that he will begin the process of announcing and selecting cabinet secretaries. We should hear the White House staffing selections, or at least the beginning of it, as soon as tomorrow. And clearly, based upon the remarks from the vice president, there was just about everything that George W. Bush could hope for, including some signals from Al Gore that perhaps some of the Democratic special interests and constituencies that have been refusing to sort of lay down their arms and let this go perhaps should, and that the vice president is encouraging all Americans, Democrats and supporters, to rally behind George Bush. That was very much something that the Bush campaign wanted to hear tonight. All
right, Carl, thank you very much for that update from Austin. Let's turn now to someone who has covered Vice President Gore for much of this year, Jim Angle, our senior White House correspondent, who has spent the last, month or so in Tallahassee, Florida, where he joins us tonight. Hi, Jim. You've covered the vice president all this year. A remarkably different tone we heard from here tonight. He did speak about how he was going to continue to fight for the people that he said he'd fight for, but this was not a fighting speech.
No, it wasn't, Brett, but you're right. That was the one reference in there that sounded a little bit like the old Al Gore of the campaign trail, but the rest of it was a very genuine, humble speech. The tone struck me, Britt, as something that we saw really only in his speech at the convention, another speech that he largely wrote himself. Al Gore does best when he is writing the words he's speaking. He's often been accused of sounding insincere, even when he was sincere by voters, even Democratic supporters. Tonight, he sounded quite genuine in this. I think he said all the right things. Obviously, he has an eye on his standing in history. His advisors, and he knew that his lasting impression with the voters would be what he said tonight, that he would be remembered no matter what he may do in the future, that he would be remembered for these remarks tonight, ending one of the longest and most bitter fights for the presidency in American history. So this was a very critical moment for the country and for him personally. If he ever hopes to run again, he obviously wanted to hit the right tone tonight. He did everything he could to try to call off the dogs, if you will, and what we've seen here, a lot of very deeply bitter people over what has happened in the election. He seemed to suggest that they stop that. We will see what Democratic groups do now that he's spoken. Brett.
All right, Jim Angle, thank you very much. We'll check in with you later as things go forward here. Another speech yet to go. To those of you here in the studio with me, Tony, first of all, you're a speechwriter. How well written this speech?
It's terrific. I think it's the best speech Gore's given all year for a whole series of things. He rose to the moment. It was affectionate about the American people. It talked lovingly the institutions here in Washington. He tried humor a few times, self-effacing. I'm going home to Tennessee to mend fences literally and figuratively. He, he was very gracious to George W. Bush. As you
said,
said,
he wouldn't be calling him back this time.
Yeah, I mean, that was, it's a weird thing when you have a speech without an audience that can laugh. But that was the second line in the whole speech.
Right.
So the very first thing was a little bit self-effacing.
Well, what about the tableau here with the family off to the side?
That looked a little weird. It was like switching off to the choir loft while somebody was preaching. I know they tried to give that, but the fact is that had to be a very difficult speech to give. It was very emotional. But Gore smiled. If you looked at the way he presented himself, I mean, there's been a lot of talk about how he's sort of gotten Ronald Reagan's head gestures down. He got the smile down too. I mean, this was almost beatific. A very nice smile. He has a tendency sometimes to rush through his presentation. While it was a little speedy, it was not one of these things where he's trying to get through the next word. This was a guy who seemed to be at ease with himself, at ease with his predicament, and willing to help. And I'll tell you what, it sets a high bar for George W. Bush. John Breaux, not long ago on Fox News Sunday,
Democratic senator from Louisiana,
said that the most important speech this year was going to be the one that the loser gave. I think he was right in that. And I also think that Al Gore has done an enormous service for George W. Bush and also for the American people. We've been through this cheesy, protracted, agonizing, illegal wrangle, and he's finally said, it's concluded. We have a president-elect. And notice that he has also already invited George W. Bush to meet the day after the Electoral College meets. Nobody's taking any chances, but he is going to have George W. Bush over to the vice president's mansion.
Fred, what's your take on this?
Well, I kind of agree with Tony. If it were a movie, I think you'd say 4 stars, nice tone, good performance, not too long, never drags. That was good. And, you know, before the speech, I had a criteria of things that I thought he ought to do in the speech. He basically did all of them. You know, he used the word concession. He did say congratulations. He certainly the thrust of the speech was that George Bush had won honorably, and he did call off the Democratic protesters in the speech, I think, pretty specifically. All in all, a great speech.
Yeah, another touch of humor was the reference to his old campaign line, "It is time for them to go." Right. It is now time for me to go, he said. But he didn't. He certainly did not close any doors. Did not resign from politics.
He didn't say he was walking off the national stage.
Exactly. I mean, he said that the country is worth fighting for, and you know, I'm still here to be in the fight. And I think I agree with Tony and Fred. It was a good speech.
We are blessed tonight by the presence of a couple of other analysts and contributors. Bill Kristol, editor and publisher of the Weekly Standard, is with us, and so is Laura Ingraham, who is a lawyer, political analyst in her own right, former Supreme Court clerk. Bill, first to you, your sense about this speech and what we talked about this earlier this evening, and whether this it is difficult to be a Democrat and lose a presidential election and come back. Does this give him any kind of a launch, however brief?
Yeah, I was disappointed in the speech, Brett. I was hoping for a Nixonian performance. You know, you won't have Al Gore to kick around anymore. And instead, we got an eloquent and gracious and appropriate speech. I do think it sets a high bar for Governor Bush. It helps, you know, look, a lot of people, me included, would blame Al Gore to some degree for putting us through the preceding 36 days. I think he's probably erased a lot of that blame among those who weren't with him. And for those who were with him, I think he's probably made them feel pretty proud to have stood with him for this last month.
We were talking in here earlier, and Tony was quoting John Breaux, the Democratic senator from Louisiana, as saying that the most important speech when all this was over would be the one given by the loser. Do you agree with that, or are we now looking ahead to what will turn out to be the most important speech?
Yeah, you know, the most important speech is always the one that's about to come, not the one that we've seen.
Well, particularly if you're trying to get people to stay and watch it,
exactly.
Right?
10 o'clock, crucial moment in American
that's
history.
Right. Right here on Fox News Channel.
Exactly. You can't see it anywhere else on your TV. I think Bush's speech is pretty important. I mean, Gore has, in a way, set the stage. I think if Governor Bush can give a gracious speech, but look both strong and humble, which isn't the easiest thing to do at the same time, and then follow it up with 5 or 6 days of bipartisanship and outreach, and you could be off to a pretty strong start. I should
say, Bill, while we're talking here, that we're looking at a live picture of the scene outside the old executive office building. We're expecting that Vice President Gore will depart there shortly and head back to his residence up in Northwest Washington. And let me, while we're keeping an eye on that, let's bring in Laura for thoughts that she may have on this speech and its political consequences. Laura?
Well, Britt, he was patriotic, and he didn't get snippy about it, which was like a wonderful combination. This was the best speech that I've ever heard Al Gore give. He sounded comfortable. He wasn't condescending. He wasn't preachy. He didn't seem snooty. He seemed like a natural, normal person. And, you know, how odd it is that this is the time that we see Al Gore the man. And I think one of the great lines, it was Peggy Noonan-esque, actually. One of the great lines he said was...
Peggy Noonan, of course, being the most famous, apart from her current work, for her work as a speechwriter for Ronald Reagan and later for George Bush the father.
Exactly. Where Al Gore said, defeat shaketh the soul, but lets the glory out. And I think, you know, letting the glory out for Al Gore might be some recognition about how to handle himself in the future, how to appeal more to those swing voters who he didn't really have that real solid bond with that he needed. And I think he, you know, knew that he needed to be this gracious, graceful winner in order to have any chance, even if it's very slight, of a run for the presidency in 2004. So I think it was an amazing performance.
All right. Thank you, Laura. We'll be back to you shortly. Let's go now back to Austin, Texas for the first cut of reaction we might find from the Bush camp about all this. Carl?
Hi, Britt, and it is very much reflective of what you and the panel have already said. Bush campaign aides, as they now make their way to the Capitol to hear the governor in just about 40 minutes, described the vice president's speech as gracious and said that they and the governor are obviously quite pleased. And one quipped, and the vice president certainly set the bar for the governor's speech tonight. In other words, a recognition that it was a good speech in their view, and now the onus is on, I guess, President-elect Bush, or soon-to-be President-elect Bush.
No, I think that now that Vice President Gore called him that, Carl, and I think that makes it official, and we can all start calling him that.
We've been having this debate about whether or not he's president-elect until such time as the Electoral College actually acts upon it. But
as a matter of fact, Carl, it has been sort of journalistic custom, which is probably not worth very much in any official terms, but it gives us some way of going about things, to call somebody president-elect when the other guy concedes. And normally that happens on election night, and you become president-elect in the eyes of reporters the next morning. We've now waited 36 days to be able to say that about George W. Bush, and I suppose that we can start saying that now.
And now the Bush campaign is saying that the president-elect has a high bar to meet because of how they recognize Al Gore did a pretty good job.
All right, Carl, thanks very much. We continue to keep an eye on the scene there outside the what we always call the old executive office building. It has since been named now for former President Dwight Eisenhower, and it is the Eisenhower Executive Office building. Hand clapping audible as we keep an eye on that picture. Tony Snow. Bar is now set high. It has been decreed from two places, from this very table and from Bush aides in Austin, Texas, that the governor must rise above. If you're thinking from his perspective, how do you match or top this?
I think the first thing you do is you thank Vice President Gore immediately. You have some sort of acknowledgement that there's been a gracious speech. You then also acknowledge the other obvious thing, which is this has been one grueling race for everybody involved. And then he proceeds to do outreach to Democrats, to blacks, to Hispanics, to whites, to the American people. Keep in mind that George W. Bush's mantra throughout this campaign, not only that he was a compassionate conservative, but he was a uniter, not a divider. He has to start paying off that slogan immediately. Bill Kristol talked before about doing a series of events to bring people in and create a feel-good sense around the country, and I think that's exactly what George W. Bush has to do. What he does not want to do is what he did the night he was certified as the victor in Florida, which is to give a dreary little speech filled with policy factoids. We don't really need to hear tonight about prescription drug benefits. What we need to hear about is a guy who's going to be reaching across the aisle and doing whatever he can to say again, I'm a uniter, not a divider, and therefore to reach out to people and make things work better for them.
Let's pause for a moment and watch the scene as Vice President Gore and his family leave the old executive office building. There's a long staircase as you come out the side entrance of that building and walk toward the White House across what's called West Executive Avenue, and the Vice President thronged there by well-wishers and supporters. Flash bulbs brightening the night is coming down the steps there, as we can see. And we're looking at the cameras are set up on the White House lawn, which is just across the street, and we are peering, as you can see, through the trees there at that scene, that tableau of unity. You see the Vice President patting his heart in an expression of gratitude for the cheers and applause that he is receiving as he leaves. One can only wonder what may be going through his mind at this hour. He's doubtless exhausted. He's probably enveloped to some extent by a sense of relief that all of this is at least over, and the agonizing suspense in which he must have been living in recent days is at an end. But surely he hoped on these nights and days in the aftermath of the razor-thin election that he would be going back and forth between these two buildings for the purpose of staying in touch with events in the White House, and that he and Joe Lieberman would be planning their administration, which I suppose to some extent they have been able to do, albeit with the uncertainty that it would ever come to pass And now, of course, we know that it will not. There have been some rumors of discontent between the Vice President and Joe Lieberman in these recent weeks, but there has been no public evidence of that, and certainly you see none tonight. Thanks to Tony Snow, whose ears are better than I am, I've been able to recognize at least that what we're hearing, and you see the rain coming down there. It is a nasty, very cold night in Washington. There are predictions of rain and sleet and perhaps snow. Gore in 4. So he begins at least with a cadre of people who are interested in that. You see Bill Daley hurrying past to get out of the cold and the rain. The Vice President, of course, will continue to enjoy the security and perquisites of his office for another month or so, and then he will be protected by a smaller security detail. His entourage will be smaller, but after you have served as President or Vice President of the United States, life is never quite the same as when you were an ordinary citizen. Jim Angle is still with us from Tallahassee, who covered the Vice President so much of this year. Jim, what are your thoughts upon hearing those remarks and seeing the Vice President through that small but enthusiastic throng of well-wishers leave the Executive Office building?
Well, I'm sure the Vice President was comforted by that display of support, some of which, of course, was managed by his political advisors. Gore in 4 sounds like something that might have been thought up earlier today. But one must say, Brett, that Gore has shown a tremendous amount of grace here this evening in what is obviously a very difficult moment for him. You have to keep in mind that here is a man who has been in public office for 24 years. He hasn't just lost an election. There is now a sharp turn in his life. And even beyond that, Britt, this is a man who has dreamed of the presidency at least since 1988 when he made his first run, but was really nurtured for the presidency his entire life by his father, Senator Al Gore, who talked often about the fact that young Al Gore was raised to be president. So this is the end, at least temporarily, of a lifelong dream for him, of a dream of the Gore family. You can imagine how difficult a moment that is for Mr. Gore as he comes and concedes the presidency after this long legal battle, after a good year and a half of out on the campaign trail, 15, 20 hours a day. It is a very, very difficult moment. And you heard him a little wistfully talk about he's not sure what he's going to do now. It will be a time of soul searching, I am sure, over the next few days. But this is a very stark turn in Al Gore's life after a quarter of a century in public office, and with little idea now of what he'll do next.
Presumably there'll be university presidencies that would be open to him, obviously. He certainly has proved that he can raise money, which I guess is the biggest thing you have to do when you're the president of an institution of that kind. Jim, does he have to work? I mean, I don't know all that much about his personal finances. You don't make all that much money. You have a lot of expenses when you serve in Washington and have kids that grow up, go to college and so forth. Could he not work and continue to pursue a political career, or has he got to get out and make a living?
Well, he's not all that wealthy, Britt, so he will have to make a living. Obviously, former presidents, former vice presidents, former presidential candidates can make a fair amount of money giving speeches and that sort of thing. Obviously, if he is thinking about running for office again, and I doubt if he has set that side yet, since he has just now conceded a long-standing effort to get to the presidency, I'm sure he still has some hopes of getting there. I would think that he would be looking for some sort of forum. He's got to make a living for sure, but the other thing is he's got to figure out a way to have some sort of forum to run from for the next 4 years, to keep his name in the public eye, to say the things that he wants to say. He's talked at times about wanting to be a writer again after working as a newspaper reporter just after he returned from Vietnam. So that might be in the offing. He's obviously written quite a bit on the environment, so that is also a possibility. But he obviously, if you want to run for office again, and I'm sure he hasn't set that aside yet, he needs to have some place to run from. So that will obviously figure in his calculations about what he does next.
Yeah, one assumes that he may reestablish a base in Tennessee, and I suppose it might be, except for some years after college, the first time in his life he really has lived there, because, of course, as we all know, Jim, for most of his boyhood was spent at what is now the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in Washington. It was then known as the Fairfax Hotel, and, of course, he went to the same private school that a lot of other people, including John Kerry and Senator John Warner and Senator Evan Bayh of Indiana went. Jim, we thank you for that. We'll be coming back to you before long. In the meantime, however, we need to pay some bills. Oh, there you see a live picture, or what purports to be a live picture anyway, of Dick Cheney. Excuse me, that is a tape playback. I thought it couldn't be live. I wonder what on earth he was watching, unless, of course, he was watching me talk to Jim Angle, which, of course, was such a scintillating conversation. I can see why he would be giving it his full attention. But that is what it looked like as you watch Dick Cheney listen. Now, Dick Cheney it has often been complained of Dick Cheney that he's not a particularly interesting speaker. But I suppose we'll have to comment here about how good a listener he is. My own sense of it is that he's a good listener. Oh, there you see the vice president speaking.
Unconditional to honor the new president-elect and do everything possible to help him bring Americans together in fulfillment of the great vision that our...
All right. Dick Cheney listening. Vice President Gore talking. Well, very little escapes our notice here at Fox News Channel. We have to take a break. We'll be right back. Stay tuned.
Has its own suspension. The engine has its own suspension. Even the 6-disc in-dash CD changer has its own suspension. If you suspect there's a reason the QX4 feels so smooth, you'd be wrong. There are many reasons. Imagine the ultimate luxury vehicle. We have the Infiniti QX4.
Okay, so you're set up with Total Choice Programming, and sir, I also hooked up the NFL Sunday Ticket subscription you signed up for.
That's for her.
Oh, so you've also got Fox Sports Net, you get your regional sports.
College basketball?
ESPN Full Court.
What about racing?
Horses?
Stock cars.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now get free professional installation when you buy a DirecTV system and sign up for Total Choice Programming.
Yeah, heard about Benny the Bison?
No, what?
He never checked out the risk and overall performance of those mutual funds he bought.
Well, Benny's no brain surgeon, right?
When we created a smarter kind of investment firm, we created a smarter kind of investor with tools like the Schwab Select List, which highlights historically high-performing mutual funds. Visit schwabwelcome.com to order a free copy of the Select List.
You don't do your homework, you end up looking ridiculous.
I'm going to try to stop the bleeding. Find me the limb. Now. Hey.
I don't see the limb!
Get off me! I'm fine.
changes everything. Fusion 1.
Let there be no doubt. While I strongly disagree with the court's decision, I accept it. I accept the finality of this outcome, which will be ratified next Monday in the Electoral College. And tonight, for the sake of our unity as a people and the strength of our democracy, I offer my concession.
Al Gore, as you've never seen him, I think it's safe to say, making a speech that has been unanimously responded to as gracious and generous. And now you see a scene that is Texas. And those are the streets of Austin down there as the George W. Bush entourage heads for the scene of his remarks, now some 23 minutes away from the state capitol. He is not making these remarks from the residence, the governor's mansion in Texas, but from the state capitol, where he will be in the fullness of time introduced by a Democratic member of that legislature. Carl Cameron is there. Carl?
Obviously, his motorcade just leaving moments ago, his wife Laura with him. Sitting at the rostrum as the governor makes the speech tonight will be not just his wife, but the lieutenant governor of Texas, a Republican who will assume the governor's office when the president-elect steps down in his role as the governor of Texas. In addition, he'll be introduced by the House Speaker of Texas, who is himself a Democrat, and he will also have seated with him the widow of the former lieutenant governor of Texas, Bob Bullock, a Democrat with whom George W. Bush did a considerable amount of legislative work and sort of crossed the most bitter partisan barriers. The governor often told tales on the campaign trail of how Bob Bullock was known to be one of the more feisty Democrats, and the two of them were able to craft a relationship that Bush says signifies his ability to reach across the partisan divide. The selection of the House chamber tonight for this address by the governor is also intended to underscore his desire to reach across party lines. Over the course of the last 35-day recount saga, most of the governor's remarks have been, there you see the governor now at the Capitol. He will be entering the front of the Capitol building, and it's only about an eighth of a mile, really, from the Capitol building to the mansion. The selection of the House chamber meant to underscore his willingness and his record for working with Democrats. The chamber will be filled with legislators, Republicans and Democrats alike. The Democrats have had the majority at times during the Bush campaign, both chambers. The lieutenant governor, obviously a Republican, but the president of the Senate in Texas, a very powerful role, and Bush has had some success reaching across that partisan divide. Maybe we can hear him as he talks to the cameras. No, apparently not. In addition to the various dignitaries, special guests that the governor will have with him tonight, there you see him with Jan Bullock, the widow of the former lieutenant governor, as I said, and his wife Laura Bush in the foreground of the camera shot there. In the audience will be the senior Bush staff, campaign manager Joe Albaugh, the campaign chairman Don Evans, Karl Rove, his senior political strategist, Andy Card, who the governor several weeks ago designated as his White House chief of staff. Again, the governor perhaps talking to the cameras. I'll hesitate. I'll pause momentarily if we hear anything. No. And Karen Hughes. Karen Hughes, the governor's communications director, familiar to Fox viewers, and her 14-year-old son, Robert. And Robert traveled with us on the Bush plane for the last year, Britt. 14-year-old kid took time off from public school. His mom sort of homeschooled him, or I should say campaign-schooled him. 14-year-old kid who, like the rest of us, has seen something of an extraordinary once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Britt.
Carl, I feel like I've met him. Would that have been in New Hampshire? Was he up there in New Hampshire when the governor was there, and during when we broadcast that first Republican debate, in which the first one in which Governor Bush participated, having elected not to play in Iowa? And I remember meeting young Robert, and I guess young Robert is now she's coming, right? She's coming to Washington. Is that as far as you know, Carl? Karen Hughes.
Karen Hughes will be a senior behind-the-scenes message and strategy aide. Who will not serve as the White House press secretary, the person who folks are familiar with going into the briefing room, conducting the daily briefings with the media. Karl Rove will also go to Washington, serving in a more behind-the-scenes capacity, dealing with both policy but predominantly with politics. It is Andy Card, the former transportation secretary in former President Bush's administration, is already designated as the chief of staff. Card has been working very hard with the governor for the past 35 days on transitional exercises, picking through personnel, doing cursory background checks on would-be additional staffers. There's something of an open...
Probably worth noting, Carl, that Andy Card, in addition to being transportation secretary under President Bush, was also the deputy to President Bush's chief of staff, who was, of course, John Sununu.
That's right. And President-elect Bush, it's unclear whether or not his campaign manager, Joe Albaugh, will be going to Washington or not. Some speculation that he may have other plans.
I think the Redskins could use him as a guard, frankly, after he's a big guy.
He's a big guy and quite a character. He spent the last 35 days in Florida dealing with much of this whole recount saga. And there is expected to be two key announcements, perhaps as soon as tomorrow. The National Security Advisor, which we've been told essentially outright will be Condoleezza Rice, who acted as the President-elect's International Affairs Advisor for the context of the campaign. And Larry Lindsey, who was Bush's economic advisor, is likely to get a key economic post in the White House, presumably a White House economic advisor.
And we don't have any reason to believe is there any reason to doubt, or is there any suspense at all about this notion that retired General Colin Powell will be asked to be Secretary of State and will accept?
None whatsoever.
You're sure?
There are no other names. Every other cabinet position one can mention, there are fallback positions and secondary names, alternatives mentioned.
The reason Go ahead, Carl, I'm sorry.
Well, the one position for which there are no alternatives and that the Bush campaign makes no bones about saying is essentially a done deal is Colin Powell.
Well, one reason I asked that, of course, is that I well remember the morning after election night in 1988 when George Bush walked into a briefing with reporters in the morning I believe, as I recall, it was the very same room in the George Brown Convention Center in Houston where his victory speech had been made the night before, and announced he had James Baker at his side, and he announced that Mr. Baker would be his nominee for Secretary of State. Mr. Baker, of course, having been a longtime friend and political ally of President Bush's, and of course had been, in addition, a loyal servant of Ronald Reagan as his chief of staff during the Reagan years, and of course who has been a very major figure during this last 36 days, pulling together the team of lawyers and others who held off the Gore attempt to recount his way to victory. So
it has also been noted by Bush insiders that James Baker fell into some sense of disfavor in the wake of the 1992 loss by then-President Bush to Bill Clinton. And Mr. Baker's return to George W. Bush's campaign was advocated in large part by his father, and there had been some reluctance expressed. It obviously, in the Bush campaign's view now, turned out to be a very strong move, and James Baker served them well in Florida. One other story about Powell, Britt, that has not gotten a great deal of attention. When Colin Powell was discussed as a possible presidential candidate in 1996, it was then well known that one of the reasons for his reluctance and ultimate decision not to do so was his wife's hesitance, Alma Powell. And Alma Powell did, in fact, go with the general to the president-elect's ranch in Crawford. And her presence there was taken as a signal by many who watched this closely that Alma Powell was prepared for her husband to serve in a Bush administration and make a return to official public life.
All right. Carl, thanks very much. I want to go back quickly to the White House, where our colleague Wendell Goler has been standing by very patiently in a cold drizzle out there, and I want to get some final thoughts from Wendell, who has also covered Vice President Gore for a long time and throughout much of this year as well. Hi, Wendell.
Hi, Brett. I want to tell you a couple of things. First of all, we understand from the White House that the president will call George W. Bush tomorrow, not doing so tonight because it's bedtime for him right now over in Ireland, the president doing a trip there. Tomorrow also, as we've noted that George W. Bush is the president-elect, being so will trigger the release of several $1 million and the keys to federal transition space. The Bush campaign had been paying for its own office space out in suburban Virginia from which to conduct its transition efforts. He will be able to move into the space designated for such a purpose here in Washington. Britt, having covered the White House, you know that one of the great things about this beat is being a witness to history, but it is also remarkable to be here and to watch great people rise to the occasion and do great things. And I want to touch a little bit on Al Gore's future plans here. One close friend and senior Democrat, a member of the inner circle, said that if the vice president were to attempt to set himself up as the head of the loyal opposition to make a run for the White House in 2004, what we would hear in his speech tonight would be a very strong call for George W. Bush to work in a bipartisan spirit with Democrats, and a suggestion that Al Gore would be looking over his shoulder. We heard no such thing in the speech tonight, Britt. I think what we saw tonight was the vice president coming to terms both with his own dream dying, his dream of a life in politics dying, and that the dream of his late father and his still very much living mother, that he would one day move into the House here, Britt. Al Gore, I think, came to terms tonight with the fact that he will not be president. Back to you.
Wendell Goler, thank you very much indeed. Folks, we have to take a brief break. Many more observations to come from our panel and reporters. We'll be right back. Stay tuned.
Let's see. College in 4 years. Costs up 40% over the next 5. Somebody do the math here.
It'd be great if our money would grow as fast as these kids. Can't believe.
Will paying for college be as painful as this?
Hey, that kid just dropped a pretzel? Because I like pretzels. I really
Glad
like
we'll
pretzels.
be able to help with their
I
education.
wonder if we should have put that money in a trust. Maybe we would have.
I hope she was kidding about college in Hawaii.
Thank you, Payne Weber.
You could grab an off-the-shelf computer for someone you love this holiday, or give them a computer that's built uniquely for them. A truly personal computer that's been turned into a music machine, or movie theater, or photo gallery, with training classes so they can get the most out of it. We think you can spot the better gift. Start with a fully loaded Gateway PC for just $799, including a year of America Online. Call 1-800-GATEWAY, where people rule.
Does your old hammer have you fumbling with nails, balancing on ladders, and smashing your fingers? Not anymore. Introducing the Auto Hammer, the world's first one-handed automatic hammer. Just drop in a handful of nails, press the button, and hammer away. It's that easy. Watch again. The Auto Hammer does all the work for you. It's perfect for time-consuming projects that require lots of nails, saving you heaps of time. Tight spots are difficult the old-fashioned way, but with the Auto Hammer, they're a breeze. And because of the easy one-handed operation, you can now hold things with your free hand. Why do this when you can hammer carefree with the Auto Hammer? The secret is a unique chamber that feeds one nail to the head. There, it's magnetically held. On contact, it's let go straight every time. It's so simple. You can have one hand tied behind your back and still use the Auto Hammer.
With the Auto Hammer, my jobs go smoother, safer, and a heck of a lot faster.
With the Auto Hammer, you can build a backyard deck without boxes of nails. Reach high places with just one hand and no ladder. The Auto Hammer is virtually indestructible, and with the nail already in place, you'll achieve pinpoint accuracy every time. Look, nail guns can cost as much as $169, but you can have the Auto Hammer for just $19.95. But it gets better. We'll include this handy clip-on level. It's perfect to straighten a shelf, fixture, or level a picture. Yours free. But there's more, lots more. We'll give you 100 all-purpose nails to use the second you get your Auto Hammer absolutely free. Try the Auto Hammer, and if it's not the best tool you've ever used, we'll buy it back. No questions asked. Call now.
Call 1-800-896-9393 to order the Auto Hammer for just $19.95 and receive the clip-on level and 100 all-purpose nails free. Or send check or money order to this address. We also accept checks by phone. Call 1-800-896-9393.
I say to President-elect Bush that what remains of partisan rancor must now be put aside, and may God bless his stewardship of this country. Neither he nor I anticipated this long and difficult road. Certainly neither of us wanted it to happen. Yet it came, and now it has ended, resolved as it must be resolved through the honored institutions of our democracy.
All right, Vice President Gore, in what our colleague Wendell Goler, who has covered him, believes may be his swan song, his goodbye to American political life. I think some of us might feel that he might yearn for another turn at that, but let's turn our attention now, if we can, here to the speech that lies ahead of us and to a Bush administration. It would appear that it's too late for James A. Baker, the James Addison Baker III, who served President Reagan and President Bush, to serve yet again, but it certainly would be clear that George W. Bush owes him a major debt, does he not?
You know, Brett, I think, well, yes, he does owe him a major debt. Baker did a masterful job with the legal case down in Florida, but, you know, they're tasks he could take on, high visibility, negotiating tasks, say in the Middle East or someplace where he has experience. I can see Baker having a part-time role at a very high level in a Bush administration. Now, I'd like to respectfully disagree with the notion that I've heard around here that Bush has to reach a very high level in his speech tonight. I don't really think so. I mean, Bush has gotten more popular during these 36 days. There's a national sigh of relief now that I think means that he will get more popular. He's going to have the megaphone now from now on. I think he just needs to be genial and likable and express his personality, solicitous toward Gore's supporter, and go on from there. I think this is going to be a period of very good feelings for him. You know, some people have said that his honeymoon as president-elect and as president would be shorter than Darva Congress. I think it's going to be pretty long.
But this is a great opportunity. I mean, the whole nation is watching. Next to his inaugural address, this is the major speech of the moment. And he did blow it the first time he had a chance to make a victory statement. This is his chance to recoup. And there are things that he certainly has got to do. He's got to thank Al Gore for his concession and thank him for his service and thank him and find the virtues in Al Gore's courage and all that.
What about it? Would it be sensible? Would it make sense for him to find, not tonight perhaps, but in the near term, some diplomatic initiative, some envoy role, or envoy, if we go less huffy about it, for Al Gore to do on, I mean...
Well,
he asked him to be his Northern Ireland negotiator.
Frankly, with the situation...
Here's an impossible job, go do it.
The situation in the Middle East being what it is, I dare say that the Israelis particularly would not like James Baker to be back as the Middle East envoy. But in any event, the other things that he could do, I mean, he could say, the great purposes facing the country are those that Al Gore and I share, to educate children who aren't getting a good education, secure the retirement of seniors, not be wonky, not spell out, you know, specific Social Security or Medicare reform plans, but especially say things that will reach out to African Americans, who of all people at this point are the most feel the most left out. And after all, George Bush did say during this campaign that he intended to reach out to people who felt left behind.
So he needs to reach out, even as early as tonight, toward a group of people who, despite his overtures to them throughout the campaign, gave him less support than they've given any Republican nominee since Barry Goldwater.
Absolutely.
Well, why would that be, Tony?
Well, I agree. First, I was going to say diplomatic post, just as long as it's not ambassador to Chad.
Yeah, that's right.
But, no, I think that's absolutely right. The Republican Party still is seen by many people, including white suburban voters, as a white guy's party. And George W. Bush understands that the secret of his success, not merely with minorities, but also with suburban white voters, is to show some success at reaching out to blacks. The way he does that is not by kissing up to Jesse Jackson or Al Sharpton, but showing up in black churches, doing radio interviews on black stations, going on black TV, same with Hispanic events. I guarantee you...
Maybe he could make Al Gore his envoy to the black community.
Yeah. No, I'm not even going to go there. That's just...
Tony, he did all that during the campaign, and it did no good whatsoever.
No, he didn't.
It's terrible. It would be a terrible thing for him to just drop it now, say, you know, be offended by the fact that he only got 10% of the vote and quit.
Well, we'll return to this subject after he speaks, but in the meantime, we have to take a break, but we will be right back. Much more to say, much more to hear from here. Stay tuned.
Need extra cash for the holidays? Don't charge it on your credit cards. Get a second mortgage with no closing costs from Ditech.com. With a second mortgage, you can consolidate all your existing high-interest debts, get the cash you need for the holidays, and end up with one lower monthly payment. A second mortgage with no closing cost is smart money from Ditech.com. Log on now for fast online approval or call us at 1-800-71-FIX.
Let's hear it for the lady. The one whose work is never done. Without you, none of us would even be here. Here's to you, Mom. From a car with the right stuff to get you through it all. Chevy Malibu. The car you depend on every day. Just like you, we'll be there.
Hey, wanna give dinner a different feel? Let them have some fun at the meal. 1 peel, 2 peel, 3 peel, 4. So much fun to come back for more.
Flaky, layered Hungry Jack biscuits.
My heart to yours.
From Pillsbury.
This holiday, break with tradition with a Terry's chocolate orange. Rich chocolate with a touch of orange flavor you whack and unwrap. Terry's. The original chocolate orange. Smashing good taste.
Is there an insurance company with a 146-year history of proving that your trust is not misplaced? Without question, the St. Paul.
President-elect Bush inherits a nation whose citizens will be ready to assist him in the conduct of his large responsibilities. I personally will be at his disposal, and I call on all Americans. I particularly urge all who stood with us to unite behind our next president.
Our next president, of course, President-elect Bush, as Vice President Gore was the first to call him this night. We're about 2.5 minutes away from hearing what President-elect Bush has to say in his first remarks now that that title has been conferred upon him. And with it, the transition money at long last and the transition office, who knows if it will even be used in the few weeks ahead. They've already set up shop out in McLean, Virginia. Let's get a couple of quick thoughts about the task facing the president-elect tonight. First from Bill Kristol, who is with us. Bill?
Let me give you one thought instead about Vice President Gore's speech. You know who he didn't mention? Bill Clinton. It's very odd.
Never does, you know.
Well, no, but it's consistent, and I'm not criticizing him for this. It's been consistent with his whole campaign. It's somewhat striking, however. He has just completed 8 years as Vice President of the United States. One might have thought he would have thanked Bill Clinton and said how proud he was to have worked with him. He went out very much as his own man, which is the way he ran the campaign. I don't criticize him for that. Maybe that's more appropriate when you're conceding a presidential election. Still, he gave the address from the Vice President's office in the old Executive Office building. And I do think all of us admired Gore's speech. He'll get universally good reviews. There's one man watching it, I bet, who might have been slightly peeved, and that was Bill Clinton, who, after all, gave him this chance and who was not acknowledged at all in this farewell, at least for now, to public life by the Vice President.
Yeah, a policy that the Vice President adopted some time back before the convention, really, and never wavered from. Laura Ingraham, a thought from you about about the task facing George W. Bush.
Well, we've already talked a lot about the need to reach out, and I think we all know that George Bush is going to reach out and try to bridge the divide in the country and say, I'm the president of all the people. I know half of you didn't want me to be president, but I'm going to do my best. But, Britt, I think one thing that George Bush has to do is he has to recognize the constituency of people who did elect him, which is the conservatives. That means get through partial birth abortion, tax cuts, and other things early on in the presidency, and he's going to have to acknowledge them.
All right, Laura Ingraham, thank you very much. We'll see how well he did that with you afterwards. In a moment here now, we're going to take a brief pause so that our Fox Broadcast Network stations can join us for a special report on this speech.
This is a Fox News special report.
I'm Britt Hume, Fox News Washington. In just a few moments, Texas Governor and now President-elect George W. Bush is to address the nation from the state capitol in Austin. In the brief time before Mr. Bush's remarks, let us check in with Fox News correspondent Carl Cameron, who's in Austin. Carl?
Thanks very much, Britt. Well, this is the speech that the governor had hoped to give some 36 days ago now. It will be his declaration that he is prepared to govern the nation and willing and eager to do so in a bipartisan fashion. In the wake of this fairly difficult recount wrangle and one of the narrowest elections in American history, recognizing that Al Gore, in fact, won the popular vote, Bush will express his desire to work with Democrats and unify the country. A short time ago, he entered the Texas State Capitol building where he described Vice President Al Gore's earlier concession speech as gracious, very gracious, quoting the president-elect now. This is a speech wherein he will say that it is time for both the public and the politicians to let this difficult time in American history be in the past and to move forward on a variety of issues. Bush will emphasize that the agenda that he campaigned on will continue to be what he has referred to as his compassionate conservative agenda, and that he will look for common ground with Democrats. Brett?
Thank you, Carl. The president-elect will be introduced by the Speaker of the House, a Democrat, Pete Laney, and he'll make the speech there in the State House chamber. And it should begin right now.
Welcome to the Texas House of Representatives chamber. It was about this time, about 6 years ago, that we were preparing to inaugurate a new governor in Texas. Many of us wondered what kind of leader he would be. We wondered how he would bring everybody together after a hard-fought election. Tonight, many people in our country are asking the same questions about George W. Bush. When he became governor, he reached out to members of the legislature of both parties. We didn't always agree on issues, but we found we could have policy differences without having gridlock. We could have debate without bitterness, and we could reach agreements and solve problems without sacrificing our principles. Above all, we learned that Governor Bush is a leader you can trust and respect. It is my honor to introduce to you a man who has earned my trust and respect, the Governor of Texas, my friend, the President-elect of the United States, the Honorable George W. Bush.
And so, to a burst of what one presumes is bipartisan applause, George W. Bush climbs the podium there to make his first remarks, now officially President-elect of the United States.
Thank you all. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Good evening, my fellow Americans. I appreciate so very much the opportunity to speak with you tonight. Mr. Speaker, Lieutenant Governor, friends, distinguished guests. Our country has been through a long and trying period, with the outcome of the presidential election not finalized for longer than any of us could ever imagine. Vice President Gore and I put our hearts and hopes into our campaigns. We both gave it our all. We shared similar emotions, so I understand how difficult this moment must be for Vice President Gore and his family. He has a distinguished record of service to our country as a congressman, a senator, and a vice president. This evening I received a gracious call from the Vice President. We agreed to meet early next week in Washington, and we agreed to do our best to heal our country after this hard-fought contest. Tonight I want to thank all the thousands of volunteers and campaign workers who worked so hard on my behalf. I also salute the Vice President and his supporters for waging a spirited campaign. And I thank him for a call that I know was difficult to make. Laura and I wish the Vice President and Senator Lieberman and their families the very best. I have a lot to be thankful for tonight. I'm thankful for America, and thankful that we are able to resolve our electoral differences in a peaceful way. I'm thankful to the American people for the great privilege of being able to serve as your next president. I want to thank my wife and our daughters for their love. Laura's active involvement as First Lady has made Texas a better place, and she will be a wonderful First Lady of America. I am proud to have Dick Cheney by my side, and America will be proud to have him as our next Vice President. Tonight I chose to speak from the chamber of the Texas House of Representatives because it has been a home to bipartisan cooperation. Here in a place where Democrats have the majority, Republicans and Democrats have worked together to do what is right for the people we represent. We've had spirited disagreements, and in the end, we found constructive consensus. It is an experience I will always carry with me, an example I will always follow. I want to thank my friend House Speaker Pete Laney, a Democrat, who introduced me today. I want to thank the legislators from both political parties with whom I've worked. Across the hall in our Texas Capitol is the state Senate. And I cannot help but think of our mutual friend, the former Democrat Lieutenant Governor Bob Bullock. His love for Texas and his ability to work in a bipartisan way continue to be a model for all of us. The spirit of cooperation I have seen in this hall is what is needed in Washington, D.C. It is the challenge of our moment. After a difficult election, we must put politics behind us and work together to make the promise of America available for every one of our citizens. I'm optimistic that we can change the tone in Washington, D.C. I believe things happen for a reason. And I hope the long wait of the last 5 weeks will heighten a desire to move beyond the bitterness and partisanship of the recent past. Our nation must rise above a house divided. Americans share hopes and goals and values far more important than any political disagreements. Republicans want the best for our nation, and so do Democrats. Our votes may differ, but not our hopes. I know America wants reconciliation and unity. I know Americans want progress, and we must seize this moment and deliver. Together, guided by a spirit of common sense, common courtesy, and common goals, we can unite and inspire the American citizens. Together, we will work to make all our public schools excellent, teaching every student of every background and every accent so that no child is left behind. Together we will save Social Security and renew its promise of a secure retirement for generations to come. Together we will strengthen Medicare and offer prescription drug coverage to all of our seniors. Together, we will give Americans the broad, fair, and fiscally responsible tax relief they deserve. Together, we'll have a bipartisan foreign policy, true to our values and true to our friends. And we will have a military equal to every challenge and superior to every adversary. Together, we will address some of society's deepest problems, one person at a time, by encouraging and empowering the good hearts and good works of the American people. This is the essence of compassionate conservatism, and it will be a foundation of my administration. These priorities are not merely Republican concerns or Democratic concerns. They are American responsibilities. During the fall campaign, we differed about the details of these proposals, but there was remarkable consensus about the important issues before us: excellent schools, retirement and health security, tax relief, a strong military, a more civil society. We have discussed our differences. Now it is time to find common ground and build consensus to make America a beacon of opportunity in the 21st century. I'm optimistic this can happen. Our future demands it, and our history proves it. 200 years ago, in the election of 1800, America faced another close presidential election. A tie in the Electoral College put the outcome into the hands of Congress. After 6 days of voting and 36 ballots, the House of Representatives elected Thomas Jefferson, the third president of the United States. That election brought the first transfer of power from one party to another in our new democracy. Shortly after the election, Jefferson, in a letter titled Reconciliation and Reform, wrote this: "The steady character of our countrymen is a rock to which we may safely moor, unequivocal in principle, reasonable in manner. We should be able to hope to do a great deal of good to the cause of freedom and harmony." 200 years have only strengthened the steady character of America. And so as we begin the work of healing our nation, tonight I call upon that character: respect for each other, respect for our differences, generosity of spirit, and a willingness to work hard and work together to solve any problem. I have something else to ask you, to ask every American. I ask for you to pray for this great nation. I ask for your prayers for leaders from both parties. I thank you for your prayers for me and my family. And I ask you to pray for Vice President Gore and his family. I have faith that with God's help, we as a nation will move forward together as one nation, indivisible. And together we will create an America that is open, so every citizen has access to the American dream. An America that is educated, so every child has the keys to realize that dream. And an America that is united in our diversity and our shared American values that are larger than race or party. I was not elected to serve one party, but to serve one nation. The President of the United States is the President of every single American, of every race and every background. Whether you voted for me or not, I will do my best to serve your interests, and I will work to earn your respect. I will be guided by President Jefferson's sense of purpose, to stand for principle, to be reasonable in manner, and above all, to do great good for the cause of freedom and harmony. The presidency is more than an honor. It is more than an office. It is a charge to keep, and I will give it my all. Thank you very much, and God bless America.
And so from the chamber of the Texas House of Representatives, introduced by the Democratic Speaker of that House, George W. Bush, now President-elect, has made his first public act now that he bears that title. A speech lasting more than twice as long as the concession speech given earlier this evening by Vice President Gore. One which echoed some of the themes that Vice President Gore touched on. He spoke gratefully of a gracious call he said he'd received from the Vice President, thanked him for that call. He wished the Vice President and Senator Lieberman and their families well, and later asked all within an earshot to pray for them. He ticked off a number of issues, Medicare, prescription drugs, tax relief, salvation of Social Security, public schools excellence that he promised to work on. It was a speech in some ways reminiscent of the kind of speech presidents make in a State of the Union address rather than a victory statement. But that is what he chose to do, to emphasize that he has not and will not abandon the agenda on which he ran for president in order to achieve the bipartisanship that nearly everyone is now saying that he must have in order to govern. And as a practical matter, looking at the numbers in Washington, narrow majority in the House, virtual tie in the Senate to be broken on important matters by the man who will be Vice President Dick Cheney. And so as President-elect Bush leaves the House chamber, we end this special report. I'm Britt Hume in Washington. Please stay tuned to Fox News Channel and this Fox station for continuing coverage of this story.
This has been a Fox News Special Report.